9. Aichi E-13A. The Aichi E-13A was a Japanese reconnaissance aircraft that was used from 1941 to 1945. It was designed to carry 3 crew members and could hold up to 550 pounds or 250 kilograms of bombs. Over 1,400 of the seaplanes were manufactured during the war, but there are no known surviving airworthy examples. During the more than 2 months long Battle of Peleliu in 1944, U.S. soldiers shot down a Japanese Aichi E-13A fighter plane in the Republic of Palau. It sank to the bottom of the sea in the waters of the state of Koror and remains remarkably intact to this day. Of course, time and Mother Nature have taken their toll on the submerged aircraft, but it's in good shape for its age, making it a popular diving site. Images of the wreck circulated on social media in recent years, sparking discussion about how it's hard to imagine that such a serene, peaceful place once looked like a war zone. The sunken plane is just one of around 60 abandoned World War II era vehicles throughout Palau, leading some to call it the wreck capital of the world. 8. Danube River Nazi wrecks. During the summer of 2022, a large portion of the globe was impacted by severe droughts, with water levels in many places hitting record-breaking lows. While this is troubling from an environmental standpoint, these extreme conditions have revealed dozens of long-lost shipwrecks, ancient villages, and other relics that had otherwise been lost to history. In Serbia, which experienced its worst drought in decades along with the rest of Europe, more than a dozen World War II-era Nazi shipwrecks appeared near the town of Prahovo in the perilously low Danube River. Identified as part of the Black Sea Fleet, the Germans scuttled as many as 200 ships in 1944 to prevent the advancing Russians from seizing them. The vessels took an estimated 10,000 unexploded explosives down to the river bottom, leaving behind a mess that the Serbian government claims will cost 30 million euros or $33 million to clean up. When news of the re-emerging ships broke, experts said that they expected more to appear as the river continued to dry up. In August 2022, Serbian officials announced plans to remove at least 21 of the wrecks from the water to make the river safer for traffic. The possibility of doing this has been discussed for years, but until recently, it was considered too risky due to the presence of unexploded munitions, and there was a lack of funding to carry out the removal safely. Now, the European Union and the European Investment Bank are stepping in to provide the loans and grants necessary to get the job done. 7. Australian Beaufort. The jungles of Papua New Guinea are home to an estimated 500 to 600 World War II plane wrecks, but many remain undiscovered due to the dense tropical foliage. One of these wrecks was found outside the town of Rabaul in 2022 by a young man named Willie Finn. Located in the wilderness of East New Britain, pieces of the wreck had been spotted by a local hunter who stumbled upon the debris while tracking wild boar and tipped Willie off to its location. Willie's group found the downed plane deep in the woods after an hours-long hike which involved river crossings, climbing up and down a mountain, and other extremely challenging feats. During the journey, Willie collapsed from not eating enough and injured his ankle. Determined to find the wreck, he kept going. He later told ABC Australia that when he saw the debris scattered along a hillside, it all felt worth it. The small but identifiable parts that are left include pieces of propellers, doors, and several guns. When Willie's group discovered the wreck, a large portion of it was buried in the mud, where it had sat for decades. About 10 feet or 3 meters down, they found the control column of an Australian Beaufort plane, which helped to identify it as a World War II-era wreck. The team also found human bones, along with pieces of a watch and a pilot's vest. The plane possibly belonged to a small contingent of Australian troops who guarded Rabaul until the Japanese captured it in 1942. Throughout the remainder of the war, it served as a major air and naval base for Japanese forces and endured intensive Allied bombing raids, Chief Israel Joseph of nearby Barham Village told ABC Australia that stories of wartime activity have been passed down from one generation to the next. He first encountered the wreck site about 15 years earlier, and he took efforts to protect it until Willie volunteered to explore and document it. Joseph's grandfather remembered seeing the planes crash land after being shot down. 6. HMS Perseus. Built in 1929, the HMS Perseus entered World War II in the late 1930s under Royal Navy Commander Peter Bartlett. At nearly 300 feet, or 91.4 meters long, it was one of the largest submarines to serve throughout the conflict. In August 1940, the Perseus was sent from the waters of southeastern China to the Mediterranean. It was one of the most dangerous places for Allied submarines during the war, with an estimated 2/5 of the vessels that entered the regions being sunk. In most cases, everyone aboard died. The Perseus managed to avoid disaster until the night of December 6, 1941, when it struck an Italian mine. It had departed from Malta 10 days earlier with 59 crew members and 2 passengers aboard, all but one of whom lost their lives in the explosion. The lone survivor, 31-year-old Navy stoker John Capes, was sleeping when he awoke to what he later described as a life-shattering jolt. He was thrown out of bed and had little time to think as the lights went out and the Perseus plummeted toward the seafloor. Water began spewing into the engine room as Capes grabbed a torch and saw that he was surrounded by at least a dozen dead, floating bodies. Capes surfaced with help from a breathing device and spent the next 8 hours swimming 5 miles, or 8 kilometers, to the Kefalonia shore in the frigid winter weather. When he arrived at the beach, he collapsed from exhaustion. At the time, the island was under Italian occupation. Not wanting the castaway to fall into Axis hands, nearby residents covertly helped Capes to safety. He spent the next year and a half living on Kefalonia in disguise and other various aliases with the help of Greek intelligence officials, until he finally had the opportunity to leave safely. Commercial diver and explorer Kostas Thoktaridis rediscovered the Perseus wreck in 1997. He identified it with the help of John Capes, who instantly recognized the sub in a photo of the wreck, which has a clearly visible crack from hitting the mine. The door to the hatch that Capes escaped through was still open, and the diving team found a mine anchor nearby, finally confirming long-held suspicions about the vessel's fate after 60 years. Today, the heavily corroded Perseus wreck is a popular diving attraction. 5. B-24 Liberator bomber. At 12,637 feet, or 3,852 meters, Humphreys Peak is Arizona's tallest mountain. On the night of September 25, 1944, a U.S. Army Corps B-24 Liberator bomber crashed into the side of the mountain. It landed on a bed of boulders in a remote area, destroying the aircraft and killing all 8 crew members aboard. In the handful of years following the crash, passers-by repeatedly reported the downed plane as a new wreck. It happened so often that during the 1950s, the U.S. Forest Service used dynamite to further distribute the wreck. Today, the crash site remains littered with debris, including engine parts and a nearly entirely intact wing. The wreck is in an area that's very difficult to access. Authorities warn hikers to search for it at their own risk, but for those wishing to see one of the more seldom visited memorial sites throughout the U.S., it's reportedly worth the visit. Would you want to check it out? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 4. Curtiss C-46 Commando. As World War II entered its final months in January 1945, a C-46 transport aircraft vanished during a brutal snowstorm while flying over India's remote Himalayas, with 13 passengers aboard. The plane was flying from Kunming in southern China when it disappeared, seemingly into thin air, over Arunachal Pradesh. It wasn't seen again until 2021, when American explorer Clayton Cools organized a search effort to locate the 80-year-old wreck. Cools took on the project after one of the passenger's sons reached out to him and asked him to look for the long-missing plane. Working with a team of guides from the local Lisu ethnic group, the team spent months searching for the wreck in perilous conditions. They crossed chest-deep rivers, trudged through snow, camped in freezing weather, and climbed to extremely high altitudes in conditions that made even the more experienced hikers in the group nervous. It was likely a major relief for everyone involved when they finally spotted airplane debris near a mountaintop. They were able to confirm the wreck's identity based on its tail number. Clayton Cools has spent years searching for lost World War II planes and their pilots, and has even spent more than $100,000 of his own money on these efforts. In doing so, he has helped bring closure to hundreds of families by providing long-awaited answers about how their loved ones were lost during the war. Over 700 Allied military planes were lost over the so-called Skyway to Hell over the Himalayas, where pilots braved 200-mile-per-hour winds, 322 kilometers per hour, and other treacherous conditions to deliver supplies to Allied forces. With Japan in control of the country's seaports and eastern plains, it was the only way to get supplies to troops stationed in China. In addition to the hazards posed by the elements over the rugged mountain range, pilots were under constant threats from Japanese aircraft. While Cools does not participate in the recovery of downed World War II planes, he has played a crucial role in locating and identifying these long-missing planes, which often serve as the final resting place for crew members who went down with them. 3. USS Wilkes-Barre. Built during World War II, the 610-foot-long, or 186-meter, USS Wilkes-Barre was a medium-sized naval ship known as a light cruiser. She entered service in late 1944, just months before the war's end. In January 1945, the ship participated in an Allied effort to liberate the Philippine island of Luzon from Japanese control, known as the South China Sea Raid. Over the following months, the Wilkes-Barre went on to serve in the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. For a brief period after the war, the vessel was used in training exercises in Guantanamo Bay, and in 1947, she embarked on a goodwill cruise to Britain and Norway. Upon returning to the U.S., the ship was decommissioned and placed on reserve in Philadelphia, where she remained until she was struck from the Naval Register in 1971. From there, the Wilkes-Barre was taken to Florida and used underwater weapons tests. During one of these tests off Key West in 1972, the old cruiser's hull broke in half. The stern portion sank on its own, and the military scuttled the bow section the next day. Since then, the wreck has become an artificial reef and a habitat for marine life. It sits upright at a depth of 320 feet, or 98 meters, and is a popular destination among experienced scuba divers. 2. Martin B-26 Marauder. The American-made Martin B-26 Marauder bomber aircraft first saw combat in the Pacific Theater in 1942. It saw extensive use throughout the war, despite its early reputation for being a widowmaker due to its high rate of accidents during takeoff and landing. The Marauder had an unusually high runway approach speed of 150 miles per hour, 241 kilometers per hour. Pilots who were used to much slower speeds often hesitated to go that fast, causing the aircraft to frequently stall. This was one of just several issues with the Marauder's early models, but the design was continuously improved, and by the end of the war, the aircraft boasted the lowest loss rate of any U.S. Army Air Force bomber. On October 17, 1944, Canadian Royal Air Force pilots Maurice O'Neill and Jack Wood departed from New Providence in the Bahamas for a routine training exercise in a Marauder aircraft. The plane experienced a mechanical failure and crashed into the water 400 yards, or 366 meters off the island's north coast, killing both men. In 2021, maritime lawyer and historian Eric Weiberg set out to find the wrecked plane. For 3 weeks straight, he spent 5 to 6 hours a day searching with just an inflatable raft and snorkeling gear. He eventually came across partially buried debris along the ocean floor and was able to confirm its identity as the long-missing Marauder. Weiberg recovered several pieces of mangled wreckage, including parts from the plane's fuselage and engine props, a cockpit seat and engine hatch, landing gear, a machine gun, and more. The items were turned over to the Bahamian government agency responsible for preserving historical heritage. Speaking with CBC News, Weiberg said that the most rewarding aspect of the discovery was being able to tell the pilot's surviving relatives what happened to the men after decades of not knowing their fate. 1. The Zibello. In recent years, the bow of a World War II-era barge called the Zibello began poking out from the surface of Italy's Po River. It became even more visible during the historic droughts that struck Europe in the summer of 2022. By winter, nearly the entire 164-foot-long, or 50-kilometer vessel had reappeared after spending years underwater. Measuring 405 miles long, or 652 kilometers, the Po River is Italy's largest river. It runs between the Alps and the Adriatic Sea and was used as a shipping route during World War II. The Zibello was transporting wood and other supplies in 1943 when it sank off the town of Gualtieri during an Allied bombardment. Thanks for watching. Which one of these incredible World War II wrecks shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.